I don't know if you watch The Apprentice. I must confess I quite like watching The Apprentice, you know. Lord Sugar, he's got, I don't know, is it 20 candidates, something like that. He gives each of them various business tasks. The winner, Lord Sugar, will invest £250,000 into their business venture. And of course the competition is there to find out who he can trust. Who has his values, who he can work with. As we've said, we are approaching Advent. Everyone seems to think that Advent is the season that we prepare for Christmas, but actually it isn't. The word Advent means coming, and Advent, yes, we do have in mind Jesus' first coming 2,000 years ago, which of course we celebrate at Christmas, but really we are looking forward to his second coming, when he will come again to earth, this time not as a baby in a manger in an animal shed. Not this time to die on a cross. No, this time to wrap up the present age and to judge who will be those who spend eternity with him in the new heaven and the new earth. These last few chapters of Matthew's Gospel, just before the climax of his ministry, which of course is his death and resurrection, just before we get to that, in Matthew, Jesus teaches us about his second coming. And he uses a number of parables. My three headings, which I think you could probably have guessed anyway, my three headings are the generous investor, the faithful and the worthless, the moment of accountability. Apologies, I haven't put them on the sheet this morning, but I think probably we can have those in our mind. The generous investor, the faithful and the worthless, the moment of accountability. This is a very memorable and straightforward story, isn't it? We have a very, very wealthy man, and he needs to go away for a good period of time. But he has buckets of money. That word talent isn't or didn't mean quite what we mean today by the word talent. The word talent in New Testament times was simply a vast amount of money. For the normal person, it was perhaps 20 years' salary. A vast amount. So in this story, I think we've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, we've got 9 talents mentioned. That would equate to several £1 million. So he gets 3 guys who work for him, 3 servants, and he entrusts each of them with a lot of money. So a couple of million for the first, a bit less for the second, maybe £500,000 for the third. Huge amounts. And he simply says, use it wisely. Set up some businesses. Invest it so that you make a good return. Rich man goes away. Rich man goes back. First servant has doubled his money. Master is really pleased. Well done, good and faithful servant, he says. I've got an even better job for you now. Second servant has doubled his money. Well done, good and faithful servant. I've got an even better job for you now. Third servant has done nothing. He has literally put the money in a tin and buried it in the back garden. He hasn't even bothered to put it in the bank or the building society to gain a bit of interest. Master is utterly disappointed. You're a complete waste of space. You're useless. You are no use to me. He takes the money off him and he sends him away. Quite an easy story to understand. The generous investor. Who is the master? Who is the generous investor in this story? Well, it is God. We don't often think about God being an investor, but that is right, isn't it? If everything I have is because of God, and He's given it to me for a purpose, and I'm accountable to Him, then He is an investor, isn't He? But the problem is, of course, I have the tendency, don't I, to think that I'm a self-made man. That the reason that I have the nice things I have is that I've worked hard to earn them. The reason that I have the skills I have is that I've worked hard to develop them. The reason that I have some measure of knowledge and education and wisdom is that I have, to some extent, learned carefully and made wise decisions. My thinking tends to go down the route, yes, of course God is there, but who I am today is down to me. And the Bible, right from page 1, will have none of this. And says, no, in the beginning, God, and God created. If it were not for God, I would not exist. If it were not for God, I would not exist in this century. I would not exist in this country. If it were not for God, I would not have this brain, or this personality, or the opportunities I have had, or the people who have been kind to me, or the people who have taught me. One of the things we do at funerals is we thank God for people. One particular prayer that I use all the time because I just think it's great, it goes like this. God of mercy, Lord of life, you have made us in your image to reflect your truth and light. We give you thanks for Bill, for the grace and mercy he received from you, for all that was good in his life, for the memories we treasure today. And it's a profound thought, isn't it, that the only reason that we have good memories of Bill is because God was generous enough to make Bill in his image and to cause Bill to reflect some of his grace and mercy. What do I have that is valuable? Here's a tip for you. Christmas Day afternoon, when you're stuffed up with turkey and you've had your glass of port and you've watched the Queen's feast and you think party games time and you groan. Here's a party game. This is quite good actually. You might quite enjoy this. The question is, there is a fire in your house. Everyone gets out safely. But you can go back in and get just one thing. What would you go and rescue? And I guess maybe we'd each have different answers to that, wouldn't we? Maybe you would go and get your wallet. Maybe that deeply significant piece of jewellery. Now, I have a man drawer, of course I do. And in my man drawer is my Swiss Army knife, and my cufflinks, and my fountain pen, and other things that Sarah simply calls rubbish. She doesn't understand me at all. Would I go and get my computer? Or my laptop with all those files on, all that work I've done? But I go and get my photo album. If I was abroad, maybe I just go and get my passport. But these are just objects, aren't they? And most of these objects are replaceable. But more seriously, what are some of the great things that you have that God has given to you? And earlier this week I sat down and I tried to make a serious list of the great things God has given to me. And I put on my list exactly what you would think I'd put on my list. I have got a wonderful wife. I've got a great family. I've got a nice home. I enjoy good health. I have had the privilege, as most of us in this country have had, I have the privilege of a great education. I have a brain that is quite good with numbers. I can't string a sentence together, but I do understand numbers. I know lots of people. I meet lots of people. I have lots of money. Why do I say that? Because 80% of the world's population live on less than $10 a day. On that measure, I am rolling in it. I live in this fantastic country. Now, I know the Daily Mail doesn't think it's fantastic and thinks we're going to the dogs and all the rest of it, but the fact of the matter is people are queuing up at Calais to risk their lives to get to this country to enjoy the privileges that I have. And you could make a list too, couldn't you, of the great things that you have. And sure, there are lots of things that I'm no good at all. If you give me a screwdriver, I've got no idea whatsoever to do with that. There are other things in my life that are far from ideal. There are things that have gone wrong that I would not have chosen. But I can clearly see that God has given me some great things. And I haven't even mentioned the greatest thing at all. What is the greatest, what is the most fabulous, what is the most extravagant thing God has given to me? He's made me a citizen of His kingdom. He's adopted me into His family. He has wiped out the penalty for my sin, taking it on Himself on the cross. He's gifted me His Spirit within me to change me, to transform me. He's given me the Bible. He's given me His Word. He's given me you lot. He's given me the church family. He's guaranteed me a place in heaven. Has God invested in me extravagantly? And what was the cost to Him of that investment? It was His Son's life. God is the great investor, but, and isn't this the point of this parable, He wants us to use what He has invested in us very wisely indeed. He wants us to be faithful servants, not, and please note the shocking word that Jesus uses next, not worthless servants. Christmas morning, this is a true story. Some of my friends give their teenage son a music system. Boxing Day, he has a tantrum and smashes it to pieces. How did they feel? Well, interestingly, it was tears I saw in the eyes of the dad and anger in the eyes of the mum. Those who work in schools tell us of children with potential who just throw it away. But the key point of this story that Jesus tells revolves around the fact that the two characters are masters and servants. The master gives the vast bags of gold, not to anyone, but to his servants, those he has caused to serve him. What is the point of your life? What is the point of God in your life? I confess that even in this church, the message I sometimes hear is that God is there for us and that He is primarily here to meet what we feel our needs are, which is completely opposite to the message of the Bible. The message of the Bible is not that God is there for us. No, we're there for Him. We were created by Him. We were created for Him. We were created to serve Him. And it is only when we function as we are created to function, that is when we find the greatest joy. I don't know if you spotted it, but I love the language of the master when he learns of the first servant's faithful service. Verse 21, his master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." Identical language he uses for the second servant. His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." And we see yet again that our God is not joyless. Our God is not miserable. He is not mean. He is not a tyrant. He is not a tyrant slave master. He's not a nightmare employer. No, our God is a joyful, generous master who longs to share his joy and generosity with those who serve him. Who longs to give more of his wealth and generosity to those who serve him. But this third servant. The servant who actually proved himself not to be a servant. The servant who didn't want the responsibility of the money. The servant who didn't like this master, didn't want this master, didn't like the task the master had given him, didn't want to appropriately use the money the master had entrusted to him. Jesus describes him, verse 26, wicked and lazy. And verse 30, we note that this servant actually gets what he wants. He gets relieved of his servanthood. Because in his heart of hearts he isn't a servant. He doesn't want to be a servant. And verse 30, some of the harshest words in the Bible, we note they are from the lips of Jesus himself. And I think they paint a very harrowing picture of what hell is going to be like for the billions of people who don't want God as their master. Verse 30, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I come to my third heading. The generous investor, the faithful and the worthless, the moment of accountability. The master did return just as he said he would. Our master will return just as he has said. And one day each of us will have to give an account. Is that a scary thought? For his people, I really don't think Jesus intends it to be a scary thought. Just look at those first two servants. Were they scared of their master's second coming? I doubt it very much. I bet they couldn't wait for his return to tell them of all that had happened. You know how they'd started this venture, but that didn't quite work out, so they'd started another venture, and that took off, and hey, look how this investment has doubled. I bet they couldn't wait. The small child who goes to school, does a piece of work, and can't wait to take it home to show mum and dad. The faithful servant who is in tune with their master, the servant who wants what is best for their master, the servant who simply wants to serve his master, the servant who has been given all that he or she needs for their master, they have nothing to fear. But the worthless servant, please will you note this, the worthless servant hadn't tried and failed. The worthless servant hadn't even tried. The worthless servant hadn't even put the money in the bank. The worthless servant simply had no interest in serving the master. Was he afraid of his master's return? Did he even think the master would return? Well, whatever. But he should have been afraid. A couple of weeks ago, we were looking at Matthew 5 together, and I was talking about marriage, and I recommended one particular book, and it has the very striking title, Married for God. And this book simply unpicks God's gift of marriage to us and asks the question, how can my marriage be used for God? How can my marriage be not just something for self-fulfillment, but how can it be used for God's service and God's joy? And so the question for you, if you are married, is how are you going to use this gift of God to you for his service? But similarly, one can imagine someone writing a book, Your House for God. Your skill at making friends for God. Your money for God. Your talent for sport, your interest in sport for God. Your situation of sitting in hospital waiting rooms for God. You can see my point here? Your knowledge of the gospel for God. If I have truly grasped what it means to be a Christian, in other words, that it is to be a servant of God, if I have truly grasped that all He has given me, He has given to me for a purpose, He has given to me to equip me to serve Him better, then how will I use the gift of my marriage? The gift of my singleness? The gift of my comparative wealth? The gift of my family life? The gift of my current neighbours? The gift of my current employment situation? The gift of my retirement? The gift of my brain? The gift of my personal relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ? How will I use that to serve? But I don't want to. Well, that is telling, isn't it? That is frighteningly telling. But I don't know how to. Well, in that case, almost certainly you need to get together with another Christian that you trust to talk it through. How can you use the great things God has given to you for His service? And as I hope you know, I will always make myself available to you to come and drink coffee with me to talk through exactly these sorts of things. But is this really how I am to find true joy and significance and purpose? Even at my age, even in my situation, even with the real difficulties in my life? Without a shadow of a doubt. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your Master's happiness.